Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times when I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
Temp check. What kind of summer are we having this year? A family road trip summer? A beach bum summer? Or a wake me up when the sun sets summer? With Instacart, choose your own adventure and skip the shopping side quests. Where available, you can get ice cream delivered to your hotel, sunscreen to the pool, or cold brew to your bed. Well, door, in as fast as 30 minutes. Wherever you find yourself this summer, you can get the goods. Download Instacart for free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum $10 per order. Excludes restaurants. Additional terms and fees apply.
Have you ever covered a carpet stain with a rug, ignored a leaky faucet, pretended your half-painted living room is supposed to look like that? Well, you're not alone. We've all got unfinished home projects. But there's an easier way. Thumbtack is the app that makes it easier to care for your home. Pull out your phone and in just a few taps, search, chat, and book highly rated pros right in your neighborhood. Download Thumbtack and start caring for your home the easier way.
Content warning: this episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls as well as the topic of suicide.
Well, Anya and I have just gotten back from a 12-hour day at court in Allen County Court in Fort Wayne, Indiana. There's actually 2 different hearings in the Richard Allen case today. We don't have a whole lot of time, but we're going to try to go through and hit what we think the big highlights of the day were. And we're going to try to do it with no editing. So please be kind.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is the Delphi Murders, Contempt.
So, with these hearings, we can talk a little bit about the fact that juries have to arrive early because there is such limited seating. So we were actually outside for several hours.
It was really cold. It was cold. I didn't dress properly, and I paid the price, but that's how it goes. And you always see a lot of people outside that you kind of get to know, people in the media, citizens who are just interested in the case. always nice to talk with them outside as we're all waiting together for an interesting day at court.
When it finally started, they hit the first couple things really quickly. The defense did not object to the prosecutor's request to amend the charges, so that was done. There was some back and forth.
It did drop, I think, the kidnapping charges, though. So there was, there was some discussion there, but it didn't seem like there was really much back and forth.
There wasn't much back and forth. And then there was a little bit of back and forth. The main focus of the first hearing, and it was the hearing which actually dominated the bulk of the day, were the contempt charges against attorneys Andrew Baldwin and Brad Rosie. And there was some business to take care of before they could really begin to go into that portion of the hearing, because David Hennessy, who represents Rosie and Baldwin in this matter, had filed some motions, except that we've talked about in the show before. He wanted the judge to recuse herself, wanted the prosecutor to recuse himself, and some other things of that nature. And none of his requests were granted.
No, none of his requests were granted. I thought there was some reasoning behind some of them. So, you have to try in that situation, but they were not granted, and things proceeded today. And so, to be clear, we're kind of, even though these are two hearings on the same day with the same kind of general group of people, they ultimately were somewhat different, because essentially the first one, the contempt hearing, was David Hennessy running the show. That is the attorney who is representing attorneys Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rosie. Sort of bizarre to have an attorney for the attorneys, but that's what you get in a contempt situation. And then the latter hearing was more of Andrew Baldwin's show, and of course Brad Rosie had more to do with the facts of the case. But they kind of both took on like a slightly different flavor as a result of that. But with Hennessy, it was kind of a multi-pronged strategy, as I would say, which kind of was reflected in his filings. On the one hand, he brought in some very respected, tenured, seasoned.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay, we don't want to jump ahead. Let's.
First of all, I neglected to mention that when the judge first came into the courtroom.
Oh my gosh, she started yelling at us immediately. Not you and I specifically.
Yelling in the courtroom. Be quiet, very loudly and very.
And the bailiff. And the bailiff was yelling too. It reminded me of like the substitute teacher or a teacher coming in and yelling at everyone immediately to get everyone to shut up, because you want to establish that like we're not messing around here. And people did shut up. Also, one thing that we've heard from some reporters is that they're concerned that a lot of people who are there more on like the online side of things are not like typically used to like the decorum that comes with the court. So like things get more rowdy and chaotic easier. We'll have more on that later.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a preview. So Nick McClelland was the one who got to present his witnesses first for the contempt part of the day. His first witness was Steve Mullen. Can you tell us about Steve Mullen?
Steve Mullen, at the time, he's been a law enforcement officer in the Delphi area for a very long time. At the time of the actual murders in 2017, he was the police chief of Delphi, Indiana. So he ran the city police department, and he became a part of Unified Command, rather. And kind of has stuck with the case, and now has since pivoted to become an investigator for the county prosecutor's office. So he works with Nick McClelland as a investigator for him. And so he's kind of evolved in his role with the case, but has certainly been somebody who's been with this case for a long time, since the beginning.
The focus of his testimony, he was actually on the stand a few different times today, but the focus of his testimony, the first time he was on the stand, seemed to be the Brandon Woodhouse leak.
His wheelhouse is Woodhouse, and no pun intended, but whatever. We're just marching onwards. I'm very tired. So he is there to say, here's what we found out regarding this whole Brandon Woodhouse situation. And what effectively he broke down was, it was brought to my attention by a tipster that Brandon Woodhouse had released a video that had Discovery product in it on YouTube. And I had to look into that.
And he did.
And found
out that
That came from Andrew Baldwin, who then said that he had accidentally sent the email to Brandon Woodhouse, but meant to send it to Brad Rosie. So he says it's an accident. The prosecution is saying it's part of a pattern that points to wider contempt for the court.
Or at the very least, recklessness with protected materials.
Negligence.
Yeah.
It seems like there were maybe names of witnesses on this thing. And
including juvenile witnesses whose names at that point had not yet publicly been revealed.
While we've noted in the past that discovery product is not the same thing as actual discovery, it's the byproduct of the defense's work, and therefore is somewhat less serious. Obviously, from the way the prosecution was telling it today, there were certainly concerns about that getting out to a random person who subsequently then posted it all over YouTube. Also, it wasn't like sometimes you get emails that are supposed to go to other Kevin Greenleys, right? That's been a kind of a common
that happens at least once a week.
Well, it happens once a week. This was not sent to like some Brad Rosie, in like Utah, right? This was sent to a guy who, was maybe being like looked into by the defense as part of their strategy regarding the Delphi case. So maybe someone with already a heightened interest in the case, and that, that can be problematic because maybe you can't really trust that person to necessarily delete anything, which will, I don't know.
That could be important.
Seems like it came back then to bite them. And also it was a big deal was made about how Mullen had to find this out. Like the defense didn't come forward with this, or at least Andrew Baldwin didn't.
So the next witness, maybe this is me being really shallow and superficial.
Whoa, what are you going to say?
Well, I got especially interested in this particular witness's testimony because this witness discussed myself and Anya extensively.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Which I'm talking about Lieutenant Jerry Holman of the Indiana State Police. And let me say, it's a very surreal and very uncomfortable feeling to be sitting in a courtroom as a reporter trying to cover a story and hear your name being discussed and bandied about.
Don't love it, folks. don't love it. Yeah. It seemed like some people who maybe quote unquote cover the case on the internet were like very excited to possibly get called as witnesses at this thing. And I was just like, I'm going to break out in hives if they say my name again. Like we never wanted to be part of the story to that extent. We wanted to cover it for you guys. We did not want to have a role where we had to be talked about in court. That just is not a place where a journalist wants to be, frankly. And I feel we did the right thing. I stand by what we did. We alerted both sides to a pretty serious leak of discovery materials.
One side was very interested in getting more information, and the other side, the defense, didn't seem to share that interest for whatever reason.
But had they pressed, or had they basically asked us, we would have been more than happy to give them everything. So we weren't trying, it was a situation where we didn't know where this came from. We didn't know what was going on. We knew this was bad, and that whatever side had done this, there were going to be serious repercussions. So we wanted to alert both sides because that would allow nobody to cover this up. Everybody would be noted and they could deal with it accordingly. So that was always our goal.
One thing that's interesting is perhaps some of you frequent occasionally the sewers of Reddit and YouTube. And there are all sorts of conspiracy theories out there saying that Anya and I have lied to you people, that we've lied to our listeners, that we did not come forward with this information to the police when we said we did. We only did it after other people had come forward. So at the very least, Lieutenant Holman's testimony today put the lie to that. He said on a morning in October, he got a phone call from prosecutor Nick McClelland, who informed him that he had just gotten a communication from Becky Patty, who is the grandmother of Liberty German, and that she had informed him that she had had some information that there were images appearing on Facebook and elsewhere of her granddaughter's blood on a tree. So he had been notified by that. He'd been notified of that by Becky Patty, and now he was telling Lieutenant Holman this. And he indicated almost as soon as he got off the phone with McClelland, we called him and we said, there's been a leak.
There's more.
And he said, oh, yeah, I've heard about the tree. And he said, there's a lot more than the tree.
Yeah, a lot more. They did talk about some of the pictures, the crime scene pictures, in more depth at this hearing. I don't really feel comfortable getting into that for a number of reasons, honestly. But you know, they were discussed in detail.
I'll tell you one thing Lieutenant Holman said today that I had not known previously. He said that in that initial call with us, he'd asked us, of course, to describe the photos. And he said that when we did, he knew based upon our descriptions that they had to come from the defense side. Because at least some of the pictures, the descriptions we gave him fit the descriptions of photos and exhibits that had been put together, especially by the defense for use in depositions.
Yeah, that was definitely, that was interesting. And, you know, as I said, we didn't know what side it came from. So we basically erred on the side of caution and tried to alert both.
And he further indicated that he, as he talked with us and as we communicated with our source, that we had provided him with a great deal of information about our source, including screenshots or printouts of screenshots of extensive communication between our source, Mark Robert Cohen, and the man we're calling R. And to be clear, we provided that because at that point, Mark Cohen didn't want to be involved in this anymore, and he asked us to essentially hand over this. And to us, in that situation, it's sort of like, again, we didn't really want to be in the middle of this, but at the same time, we felt that the situation was pretty serious and could compromise a lot of things, could compromise the case against Richard Allen, could compromise elements of Richard Allen's defense. It just spoke to something very nefarious going on within the case. And so we felt, you know, kind of we were obligated to do the right thing. And so the printouts we provided them of all of these communications were entered as exhibits today with the court. They also entered in exhibits. We provided Lieutenant Holman with printouts of the crime scene pictures we had received. And I'll take a moment here to mention I've seen some people online saying, why on earth did Kevin and Anya want to print out these awful pictures? Isn't there something tasteless or awful about that? And the reason we had to print out those pictures is it was important that there be a record for law enforcement of exactly what we received. And these came to us in text messages. And so the options were to print it, make one print out of them and give them to law enforcement,
and then delete them off of our phones,
or give them our phones. And obviously we could not give them our phones because there's a lot of information on those phones about our sources.
Yeah, there's no way we would ever turn over our phones to law enforcement under any circumstances. I'm sorry. Like, that's just not gonna, that would blow way too many sources out of the water. Not even in one case, just in general. Like, that's bad practice. You don't do that. That being said, we did want to show what we had. And so this was a way around it. And it also then allowed us to just delete the stuff off our phone. I never want to see any of it again. It was awful. It was just horrifying. And I'm just so sorry to the families of these two girls that they have to live now with the fact that these things are out there. And I'm sure a lot of people have not deleted them. And that makes me really sad because they shouldn't have to deal with that. This never should have happened.
Achieving a gorgeous grin from home isn't a total mystery with Bite Clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all of your sleuthing friends start asking, what's your secret? Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates. Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto, the car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
What makes a life a good one? Is it the adventure you have? Or the friends you find along the way? Maybe it's pursuing your passion while striving to protect, defend, and save what you believe in every single day. So what makes a life a good one? In the Coast Guard, we think it's all of the above and more. But you'll have to find out for yourself. Visit gocoastguard.com to learn more.
To lighten things up for just a moment, it was also interesting that occasionally Lieutenant Holman would get a little tongue-tied once he referred to us as he referred to Anya in particular as Mr. Kane.
Mr. Kane, that's what they call me.
And another time he referred to her as Mrs. Kane.
That's my mom. No, it's okay. I mean, yeah, there's Mr. Kane, Mrs. Kane, and Ina Kane. So nobody knows what to do. It is a pretty chaotic name, in fairness. But it's one of those things where it was surreal. Didn't love that, but nothing. You know, there were some surprises in terms of what the defense side brought up. But maybe should we get to that now?
I'll get to that now. At least the beginning of it. Attorney Hennessy, who's made it clear that he's not a fan of this program,
didn't stop him from appearing on it, though. Check out our episode with him.
He actually went on. He did an interview with a pro-defense YouTuber where he actually told a rather disturbing lie about me that later had to be retracted because it was so obviously blatantly wrong.
It's almost like he said it in bad faith.
And the YouTuber in question didn't even bother to check it, which he could have done very easily.
So weird. I wonder why they want to smear neutral voices in this case.
He referred to us derisively as murdersheet people.
Was he being derisive, or was he trying out a hot new branding, phrase for us to try out?
Yeah, we're thinking we should start selling T-shirts that say murdersheet people and sell them for everybody over our Patreons or on our Facebook.
Yeah.
We're all murdersheet people here.
It was derisive. I think he was pulling a Don Draper in there. No, I mean, it was definitely derisive.
It's definitely derisive.
These podcasters. Like, okay. Again, he didn't even plug his own appearance.
He objected to the admission of some of these communications because, of course, the person we're calling R, who was part of those communications, later tragically took his own life. And he said, well, because R is deceased, he's not here to authenticate them. And McClelland argued that there are some exceptions to the hearsay rule, like admissions against your own interest and things like that. And he was able to get them admitted.
Yeah. And should we talk a little bit about some other things David Hennessy claimed about us in particular that were kind of interesting?
Are you talking about the Ron Logan document?
I am indeed.
Take it away.
Oh, let's go. Yeah. This was totally if there's a Delphi bingo card, this was one I was not expecting. I would say that, so Kevin and I, when we first started reporting on it, in the beginning, we were known for two kind of major documents that we published. And one was the Kagan-Klein trade. Interestingly enough, both have been couched by commentators who don't know what they're talking about as leaks, but neither really fits what's happening in the current moment. The Kagan-Klein transcripts that we got, that was a glitch. That was a glitch. Somebody uploaded a document to the wrong thing. It went public. Kevin saw it. We grabbed it. And then we had it. Nobody leaked it to us. Nobody was saying, hey, murder sheet, better be hanging around my case at 12 p.m. Like, no. We just got it. It was dumb luck. But, Kevin made his own luck because he was constantly checking the Kagan.
I'm very unhealthily obsessive. I'm not a.
It was great. I mean, you did a great job. So that was one. The second one was the affidavit and search warrant. Yeah, the search warrant probable cause affidavit for Ronald Logan. Ron Logan, a man who was a suspect in the case at one point back in the early days in like 2017. This is the man who owned the property on which the girls' bodies were found. And he seemingly had some sort of history of domestic violence or domestic violence allegations, certainly. And, you know, there was a lot of scrutiny on him. And I think that's understandable. If somebody has potentially been violent towards women in the past and then people are found dead on their property, I personally think that's something to look into. You know, regardless of whether they're older, he was in his 70s at the time.
So we got this search warrant and affidavit for the search warrant. And we've never said who our source was, and we're not going to say who our source was. But and so Mr. Hennessy tried to make it seem suspicious. Like, where on earth could they possibly have gotten this source? And the implication, I believe, was that the people in the courtroom were supposed to assume that we got it from someone who perhaps worked at the courthouse and was up to no good. And that's not true. And I'll also go on to say that it is pretty well known in this community that there was another reporter who also got those documents, and she received them directly from Ron Logan. Ron Logan, in fact, possessed these documents lawfully and frequently shared them with people.
Or offered to share them.
And I'll say another thing. When we got these documents, the gag order was not in place.
Richard Allen was not on anybody's radar.
But let's assume for a moment the gag order was in place. If the gag order was in place, the person who shared those documents with us was not covered by the gag order and therefore did not violate it.
Not even close. And secondly, I think when you trace what I imagine is the kind of the line of where the documents came from, coming from Ron Logan, he's not obligated to keep this secret. I mean, those are his documents. It's his case. He very much felt that law enforcement at a county level and with the state police ruined his life, and that they, you know, arrested him. They kind of threw him in prison for a probation violation. And he felt that his association with this case ruined his life, even though he was never charged and seemingly they didn't turn up any real concrete evidence against him. So this was a man who had a reason to give out things that showed his side of the story. So, I mean, it's not baffling. We've also talked about those documents a lot on the show. I feel like we reported those out a good amount a while ago. So it's just bizarre to me that they would bring them up in this way just to fit a narrative without really doing any digging or due diligence. And it's kind of, when you see this defense team kind of make claims, it's sometimes tempting to sort of really kind of I certainly always want to hear them out, but maybe sometimes it's tempting to be wow, that sounds really good. But when you've been on the receiving end of the kind of jump to conclusions that sort of seems to characterize them sometimes, it's a little bit maybe do your homework before making claims. And I'm sure from Hennessy's perspective, he doesn't care because it's this one contempt hearing, it's not going to come back to bite him in any way. But I think things like this erode confidence over time in the abilities and the truthfulness of people. And so, yeah, that was one thing. It was wow, that's not apples and oranges. That's apples and bacon, I mean, I don't know.
Were there any points in the cross-examination of Lieutenant Holman by David Hennessy that you wanted to bring up other than murder sheet people?
I don't know of anything really specific. My notes are so crazy. My handwriting's so sort of hard to follow to a certain extent. I have things to say about Hennessy's performance in general, but it may be better to wait to the end.
Wait to the end. He tried to say things like, "Oh, weren't you, Lieutenant Holman, trying to threaten R, who later took his own life, with jail?" And Lieutenant Holman was saying, "No, I didn't threaten him with jail, but I did say that the judge in the case indicated she might jail people. So I'm trying to give him information without threatening." So they were back and forth on issues like that.
There was something around that with Yeah, like, basically Hennessy also accused the judge of running her investigation, because I think Holman said something to the effect with the judge is unhappy, or like, I'm going to look into this for the judge. The judge did order the investigation. She ordered the parties to investigate this. So there's like truth in it from that angle. But Hennessy was taking that to mean like the judge has put on a deerstalker cap, grabbed a magnifying glass, and is roaming around the moors trying to figure out what's going on. And obviously that would be super inappropriate for a judge.
Super inappropriate.
And she also shot that down pretty fast. And I'm not doing that, basically. Like, what are you talking about? I think it's an aspect of like, you need to recuse yourself because you're too deep into the mystery. And I saw what they're trying to do there. I just don't really feel like they kind of, I mean, a lot of it seemed to be like games with semantics.
Another thing that came up in Cross, there have been some allusions to in these text messages that we shared. There were some allusions to R suggesting that he knew Andy, clearly a reference to Andy Baldwin. And Hennessy got Holman to say that Lieutenant Holman, was never able to find any evidence that would corroborate a direct personal relationship between R and Baldwin. There was also a back and forth on part of Hennessy's defense is, well, there's other crime scene photos that leaked too. And maybe some of you are aware of this, maybe you're not.
We've talked about it on the show.
And obviously, everybody who's listening to this, as Murder Sheet people, have listened to every show countless times.
That's what we expect from every Murder Sheet person, guys.
But there were some people who were part of a search party who found some of the girls' clothing items, and they took pictures of those. And those leaked by the searchers. And so Hennessy was trying to suggest, were these pictures taken by searchers of clothing are crime scene photos that also leak, so therefore this other thing isn't that bad. And Holman made the point that there's a difference between crime scene photos taken by police who are controlling a crime scene and so-called crime scene pictures taken by searchers before police even show up. Lieutenant Holman also said that you don't have a crime scene until the crime is actually uncovered, because you don't know where exactly the crime took place. And at the time the searchers took these pictures of the clothing items, it was not known that this was in fact a crime scene.
And I should note that Judge Gull seemed very inclined to agree with him on that. Like that, it's like definitionally that's not a crime scene. And also, it's just a very different kettle of fish when you have civilian searchers making a bad decision versus law enforcement or versus the defense attorneys themselves. It becomes more important when it's people in an official capacity rather than civilian volunteers.
David Hennessy made a number of interesting choices today. We all know what we mean when we say interesting. One of them that surprised me is he made a point of bringing up the fact that Mitch Westerman had a girlfriend in Franklin.
Yeah, I'm like, are they trying to slam this guy? I mean, yeah, I was kind of surprised by that.
Next witness is Ben Rector. Who's Ben Rector? What did he have to say?
He is a detective for the Indiana State Police. He investigated the leak. And he was here today to speak to some of the more in-depth investigation into that leak. So what I mean by that is data they were able to uncover from Mitch Westerman's phone, mostly, is what he spoke to. So what do I mean by that? Well, it would appear that Mitch Westerman's phone is actually locked. They can't get into it. They estimated that they might be able to get into it in like 2 years. I think that was the date thrown around. But they did have a bit of a backdoor because they were able to get into Mitch's iCloud account, in which he had saved screenshots of his communications with a person named Andy. I wonder who that is.
Wonder who that is.
Don't. Who knows? But yeah, so that
there's apparently a number of interesting communications memorialized in the screenshots. I guess you would also have to ask yourself, why would Mitch Westerman be taking screenshots? Typically, I would take a screenshot of a text either if for some reason oh, Anya said something really memorable here. I want to remember it forever.
You think that's what he was doing? Oh, Andy, you're such a card.
Or you take screenshots because you're sharing them with other people.
More likely.
But we're not, they say that in these screenshots, there are discussions about the case and impressions of people.
Ooh. Well, I'd love to know who they're dishing the hot goss on.
But those have been sealed. Is there anything else you want to say about the rector testimony?
I think one thing that came out to me in the rector testimony, and this was more of in speaking with the, just Mitch Westerman occupies a very bizarre position in this case. The defense initially seemed to try to sell him as a random friend who, did a burglary and stole a bunch of stuff. And then they kind of tried to backtrack with that and say, actually, he is a trusted consultant sought throughout the Indiana counties for his legal expertise and strategic insights. And those are two very different things. He's the bumbling, clownish friend who did something really bad, or he is some sort of Iago to Andy, who's sabotaging him and is his trusted advisor. Both kind of feel like weird fits to me, because the Mitch Westerman we talked to was just a guy who seemed really enthusiastic about his friend Andrew Baldwin. I still don't understand why he did any of this. But that being said, I think it does underscore to me an issue when it comes to blurring the lines between friends and colleagues and the dangers that can present when you're working with confidential materials in a highly charged case like this.
Yes. And then it's lunch break. And
I didn't get lunch. I just stayed in.
I didn't get lunch either. We were there for 12 hours. We didn't eat.
I wasn't hungry.
Oh, aren't you so sweet and special?
I was just feeling sick.
So we all knew that coming up ahead, David Hennessy would be presenting his case. And if you are familiar with such things, as I imagine you are, you're aware that his witness list contained a number of YouTubers of, shall I say, less than sterling reputation. One of them, who didn't appear to show up today, a woman named Courtney Parsons. And I highlight her in particular because last week she decided that, I think there's a person who works as a court reporter who happens to be a member of the Murder Sheet Facebook group. This must mean that she is a secret source for them. She is not. And so she took this person's name and blasted it on social media, which resulted in this person deleting her social media. So I've never communicated with this court reporter, but generally speaking, if you're in a situation where you delete your social media, you're not feeling very good or very happy.
Well, it's just harassment for the sake of harassment. I mean, there's no, they've not uncovered something. It's just let's go after whoever. And that's what these people do. And that's why, frankly, I think it's disheartening to me that the defense has attracted so many people like that. I think there's a certain level of bizarre behavior for the prosecution-sided people, but I think it is typically lesser in scope at this point. Maybe it'll grow. I don't know. I hope not. Hope not. We don't need more insanity, but I do feel like there is this element of the defense where it is this absolute disaster. It's like people who are human disasters who go around and try to make everybody else feel bad. So it's kind of that's where we are.
So Courtney Parsons did not appear to be there today. Angela Sadowski did not appear to be there today. Rick Snay, a last-minute addition to the witness list. I am sure he was going to be the star witness for the defense.
This guy was going to blow the whole thing open. I swear to God. This guy has, he has his finger on the pulse of something.
So over the lunch break, he got into some sort of physical confrontation with another gentleman, and as a result, both of them were barred from the courthouse.
That's where we are.
That's class.
Also, everybody behind the scenes has been calling this forever because they've been publicly feuding on their YouTube channels. So, this was the most inevitable thing. But what made me laugh a bit is that for an internet crank, getting called as a witness, what a cool opportunity. And couldn't even hold it together. It had to turn into a high school fist fight before that big chance. And wow, just talk about impulse control. Just fascinating. But that's the atmosphere here. It's a bit carnivalesque when you bring in a bunch of YouTubers and try to tout them as experts in something, or tout them as having anything to say that's relevant or credible.
So we'll never know what he would have testified.
I'm sure he would have blown the whole thing open. I'm still waiting for that.
Julie Melvin was there, and Stephen Wood, who uses the name Skip Jensen online, were there. But they were not the first witnesses called after lunch. The first witnesses
were the good witnesses.
Were attorney John Boren, let me get these other names, Cade Feeler and Andrew Machernowski.
These guys, I felt when I heard these three, this trio, this was it. I mean, you could have done just this and maybe poke some other holes into the state's case, or made the argument that the press release wasn't really contempt because of the timing. But these two gentlemen and this lady, these attorneys, are all very seasoned, tenured lawyers with years and years of experience amongst them, and all very professional, engaging. I enjoyed hearing from them. We found out that Mr. Boren worked on the Steve Judy case. I mean, that's
a notorious murder case that we'll probably do an episode.
Yeah, that's really wow.
So they basically made the arguments that we don't think what Baldwin and Rosie did rises to the level of contempt.
One of my favorite parts about this is that whenever Nick McClellan asked all of them if they ever lied to a judge or the court, they all they didn't quite do this, but they all gasped, almost like, oh, no, never. Of course not. It was just, they were delightful.
Well, I'll tell you my favorite part.
Yeah.
It blows your favorite part out of the water.
Well, go ahead.
John Boren at one point indicates that at some point in his career, he knew a man named Racehorse Haynes.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
I don't care, but I loved it.
Yeah, that was important too.
I wanted to stand up and cheer. So then Julie Melvin comes to the stand, and she is apparently there to testify that, sometimes on Facebook and other things, she sees things that might be leaked from somewhere.
Wow, Julie, you cracked the case.
And Nick McClellan objected and said, we're talking about specific material that was leaked and protected by a court order. This is just random stuff. Miss Melvin just happens to see what is the relevancy here. And ultimately, the judge agreed, and Julie Melvin left the stand.
Without saying very much at all, which is kind of to be expected. When you bring in somebody like that, somebody who's maybe at best an internet sleuth and at worst a crank who has harassed Libby's family for years, I would say that you're kind of bringing that on yourself. And that's part of the reason why I kind of, cast a bit of a side eye with Hennessy about taking on that strategy, because it seems like you're risking a lot of your credibility for very little gain. And I heard reporters in the hallway, beforehand and not afterwards, because afterwards we just beat it. But beforehand, sort of being like, well, who are these people? And what, are they going to even be allowed to testify? Because they're just these random internet figures.
And has nothing to do with it.
No.
Let's say, for instance, Anya, as we all expect, is arrested for stealing a bunch of boxes of cereal.
Oh my God.
And her defense is, well, Judge, last week, Kevin ate a box of cereal that he bought lawfully. It's okay. Or even if you want to say Kevin last week stole a box of crackers. Okay. But that doesn't address whether or not you stole the cereal.
Yeah. And it was just bizarre because to be honest, Kevin and I kept on running into Hennessy and Melvin on the town the night before.
Yeah.
So it was just bizarre to see an attorney in this case palling around with somebody who does not have a very good reputation, even within the internet sphere of this case. I mean, I'm putting it very politely to say that. I would not say that this is a person that is an underground favorite. There's other people I do not respect at all, but I could say okay, I can see how they have an internet following here. But with her, it's always just been one disaster after another. So the fact that they're yes, this is the person to wine and dine. I mean, I guess she got a free hotel stay out of it, but I don't really see how it benefited them because it was, again, the worst of both. She didn't even get to cause any chaos because the judge shut it down. So they just looked foolish for nothing. The defense looked foolish by bringing this woman in. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then
That's very blunt, but that's what the truth is.
And they brought in Stephen Wood, otherwise known as Skip Jensen. He talked about how he's great friends with Gary Bodette, who's known as Fig Solves. They had lots of great conversations, which Skip, of course, without the blessing or approval of Mr. Bodette, shared with the defense teams, just like a good friend does. But ultimately, again, this was the same issue. Whatever Mr. Bodette may or may not have done, whatever Mr. Bodette may or may not have leaked, it has nothing to do with the actual issues being addressed here.
You can't, if the defense felt that, and something the prosecution was doing specifically rose to the level of contemptuous behavior, they can file something. They can take care of that. They can address that. But you can't just try to bring unconnected stuff in. And again, frankly, like their claims about Gary Bodette, I have my doubts about. I have my doubts about the level of his connection with Nick McClelland. I very much imagine that he was sending McClelland stuff, but I think it would have to rise to the level of Nick McClelland, pulling him aside and say, "Hey, Gary, you hear about that bullet? It's coming out." It would have to be something like that to mirror the Mitch situation for me. And I don't feel like they have any proof of that, or they would have shown.
And then they brought Steve Mullen back. Steve Mullen said, under questioning by Hennessy, we gave the defense team lots and lots of hard drives and flash drives full of discovery materials. Then they bring Lieutenant Jerry Holman back, and they get Jerry Holman to answer more questions about us. One big question was, did the murder sheet people, which again is what he called us over and over again, the murder sheet people, did the murder sheet people ever tell you they had pictures of the victim's clothing or pictures showing shoe prints or tripod indentations? And Lieutenant Holland was like, no, because we never did, because we never had such pictures.
The only thing I can think of with clothing is that everybody got sent those searcher images, and we've actually reported that on the show that we had those. So we've been open about that. I have no idea what he's talking about, tripod. That just sounds, again, like something he probably got from one of his little internet sleuths. And it's like, I don't know, like, why would an accredited qualified attorney want to go that route? I don't understand it. There was a degree of secondhand embarrassment watching him.
Next witness, none other than Brad Rosie, who David Hennessy called
Mr. Rosie. His name is pronounced Rosie. People who know him have told us this. I don't know why he's representing this man and he doesn't even know how to say his own name. They seem to have a weirdly combative relationship, to be honest. I didn't understand that. Rosie did try to make excuses for Hennessy. One problem, there was the acoustics in this room were terrible. And so speaking in somewhat of a garbled manner, Hennessy was somewhat hard to follow at times, although that was partially not his fault because of the way the room was. And Rosie was like, it's happening to everyone. No one can hear each other. But I felt like there was like some weird tension between them that I didn't really understand. Maybe it was the name. I don't know.
Rosie also talked a lot about the press release that the defense team issued where they strenuously argued for the innocence of Richard Allen. He indicated that when they released this, they weren't trying to try the case in the public. No. They just wanted to show Richard Allen that they supported him. Isn't that what he literally said?
That is what he literally said. I think it's a fair argument for him to make. Listen, they did make this argument, and I kind of agreed with it. Like, the other guys have gotten to try the case in the press all they want. Now we come on the scene. That's not fair. I think there's some truth in that. But yeah, saying we stand by you, buddy, like that. I don't know. That okay. I also think it's a fair argument that, like, hey, it's not really breaking the gag order because technically it didn't go down until after we did that. Although I also understand, like, the more context they give on the in-chambers meeting, the more it sounds like they kind of like told the judge they wouldn't do this, and there's no like recording of what exactly was said. So I think they kind of are, maybe that helps them in that situation.
And the other thing that really jumped out to me about Brad Rosie's testimony is that in the testimony from the other attorneys and stuff, they tried to make a big deal. Yeah, sure, Andrew Baldwin accidentally sent this material to Brandon Woodhouse, and he did not inform the court of it for quite a while afterwards. But that's not a big deal. Why would you think you need to do something like that? And Rosie said, well, as soon as I found out about it, months later, I immediately notified the court. So maybe Brad Rosie thinks it is a big deal.
I mean, I feel like out of, I mean, we'll talk about this in a minute, I guess, because we should probably know who was not called. Right?
Who was not called?
Andrew Baldwin.
Yes, it's interesting that the attorney who's the most intimately connected with these events was not called.
Yeah. It makes you wonder why.
It raises some questions, which we should let our audience ponder on their own.
Yeah. Chew on that. Also, I feel like if I were Rosie, I'd be like, I don't know. I'd be pretty mad. This was not his office. This did not happen with one of his friends. I feel like Rosie it sounds like he's very much standing with Baldwin in this, but to me, I don't know. He's a person where it doesn't really, like, I feel like this definitely reflects far less badly on him because he just does not have that proximity. And if I were him, if I were in that position and I was essentially potentially being punished because something my partner was doing, I'd be pretty annoyed.
I like to mention another thing that Hennessy said that really jumped out at me. He said, if there are elite crime scene pictures or if there are elite crime scene photos still out there, it is the fault of law enforcement because they didn't do their job and go and get them all. And that seemed to be an interesting thing to say because it was his team that was supposed to stop them from getting out in the first place.
Yeah, that's sort of like being like, it's the EPA's fault for not, cleaning up this Superfund site that we created as a business. I think also, at this point, they're out there. At some point, to me, it seemed like a containable leak, but I think pretty early on, they got to YouTube and then people spread them. Even people who said they didn't spread them. And I don't know what they're supposed to do. They can't really just kick down everybody's doors at this point. It's too late. And that seemed like a very lack of personal responsibility sort of argument. I thought Hennessy shined, for lack of a better word, when he had experienced attorneys talking about how this isn't really that big of a deal. Or maybe it is a big deal, but, stuff happens and it doesn't rise to the level of contempt. That was when I found the arguments that he was making pretty strong, or at least wow, that's good. But when I think he totally just, he really, I don't know. He struggled with those internet folks, those, the Steves and the Julies. It just honestly kind of, it was it was just a mess and they got shot down so quickly. So it was again, tarnished credibility for no reason. For no reason. There was no benefit. Even if they'd gotten up there and caused some chaos, then maybe it would have been worth it.
So we are running short on time. Anything else you wanted to say about Hennessy before we move on?
I thought he did generally a pretty bad job. And he sounded like, he was kept on calling Woodhouse, Woodson, getting people's names wrong, getting his own client's name wrong. He seemed to be having a lot of trouble hearing and then other people hearing him. And at some point, he just had static going off, I think, with one of his devices. I just felt bad because it just felt like it didn't feel like a very smooth performance. It didn't feel like a very compelling performance. And it just felt like if I were Rosie and Baldwin, I would not be happy with that defense. I didn't think he did a good job defending them. It's not that I think Nick McClellan did an amazing slam dunk job, but I thought he did well. And I just thought Hennessy just looked kind of confused and frazzled by the end of this thing.
I agree. Baldwin did have a chance to step up in the next hearing, which covered the motion to dismiss the whole case because of the destruction of potentially exculpatory evidence. This is the claim that because an interview with Brad Holder was erased, that interview, they should have known it was exculpatory and they should have known that by erasing it, they were damaging the case. And so basically Andrew Baldwin had to stand up and with his witnesses show that in 2017, at the time this interview was erased, the prosecution, law enforcement should have known how important it was based on the information they had. But the problem is, it's like Andrew Baldwin with his witnesses, Todd Click and Amber Holder, focused entirely, or at least almost entirely, on things happening after 2017, after the destruction of the interview. And I say destruction after it was erased.
So is this a dumb example? And tell me if it is, because I want them to know that my analogies are not all winners. They already probably know. Like if I make a cake and I put it in the kitchen and like you eat it, like whether or not I'm allowed to get mad at you for it depends on like when I told you it was very important for me to save this cake. Like if I told you afterwards that this was supposed to be for like a fancy dinner party I'm throwing, maybe I should have told you that ahead of time instead of just leaving it out there tempting you. Whereas if I told you like the day before, don't eat this cake that I'm going to put out there, then you're more busted.
And what he had to do was show they knew in 2017, and he didn't even try. He was focusing on other things entirely. It's like
he was putting out the Frank's memorandum. He was putting out the Odinist theory again.
It's like if you go to play a football game with a baseball cap and a baseball bat. It was strange, and the judge got frustrated with him.
The judge at one point, she called all the counsel to the bench, and I don't remember what the quote was, but we heard her say something along the lines of like, if you don't basically like put any of this in 2017, then you're wasting everybody's time. And that's true. You may be wondering, well, isn't it a big deal that they may have erased this? Potentially. That's something they could potentially pitch to the jury and say that this was a big deal and it hurt our case, and here's why it's bad. Here's why they're incompetent.
And when it came time for the state to call their witness, they called Steve Mullen again, and he explained in great detail that it was an accidental erasure.
In excruciating detail. He explained how this happened, and essentially it was a glitch. Nobody did this on purpose. It was some sort of technical glitch that went off, and it's bad, but it feels like, again, they're putting it out there. They're kind of like letting the prosecution know their strategy well before trial. And to what end, I ask, because to me, something to raise to the level of a case being thrown out would have to be something that actually fits the rules on that. And that would be something where they knew very well that this was a big deal, this Holder interview. But if Holder's just a guy who a few people tipped in, they talked to him, he has an alibi, and that's that, then that doesn't necessarily look important to them at that time. That's not like a suspect. And when you have like them being inundated with tips, I just don't see that. And again, the defense can beat them up over it at trial, and that might be a good idea because then it makes it look incompetent, and that's good for the defense. But like
in his cross-examination, Baldwin was trying to score points by saying, oh, once he realized in August 2017 that the interview was erased, why didn't you go and do another interview with him? And Mullen was like, this guy was never a key suspect because he had a good alibi. It worked at the time. So
yeah, it just feels like, I don't know, like some of this stuff, it's not hitting the level that you think it would be from the defense. So close to trial scene. They're not hitting that level of like scoring the points they need to score to help them going into this trial. And I don't know. It feels like a lot of table pounding, frankly. If you have the facts, pound the facts. If you have the law, pound the law. Otherwise, pound the table.
So let's wrap by talking about what we should expect next. It's not clear when Judge Gohl is going to issue a ruling on whether or not to dismiss the case based on what we saw today. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of suspense there.
Way.
She indicated that she's going to give Hennessy a week to write a memorandum on the contempt issue, and that she's going to give McClelland a week to write a response brief, and presumably she will rule within 30 days after that.
And apparently that takes us all up to like a week before trial. So I think we can all assume that there's not anything going to happen in May except for more of this stuff. I can say that in general, I felt like the defense did not show its strongest side today. I hope that they can kind of recalibrate once this contempt issue is done, and perhaps kind of maybe finesse some things, because if I were in Richard Allen's camp at this point, I would be very concerned about the performance. It's just not, don't seem to be clicking. I don't know. I feel like the performances, there needs to be more cohesion. There needs to be more credibility. And I think with the prosecution, by just playing it safe and kind of playing it close to the vest, they're kind of seem to be running in circles around them at some of these hearings. And that can't be a good feeling if you're in Richard Allen's team.
And it's always time for us to wrap up when Anya starts making accidental puns, just talking about things clicking. And one of the witnesses, of course, was Todd Click.
I genuinely felt so sorry for Todd Click and for Amber Holder, because they basically got dragged up here, and then their testimony was essentially worthless for the actual hearing, and then were sort of dismissed abruptly. And like, that's gonna be disheartening, because they came up here trying to share their stories, and it wasn't the appropriate moment. It didn't really fit what the hearing was about. And I genuinely was like, that's not cool for them.
Well, we have to go. Let us know if you have any questions on any of this. We can always cover more of it in depth later. Thank you so much for listening. And obviously, we will keep an eye out and an ear out for further developments.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.